welcome to Jessica. I'm your host, Jessica Rector. Now, some of you may recognize my guest today from a previous show, and we got some questions regarding her as soon as we got done filming that, so I said, let's bring her back so we can answer those questions. Also, we're going to talk with her today about being a teenage mom, or when she was a teenager, being a teenage mom, and then a few years later being a little older, a little bit wiser, but still having to balance the family life and go after her quote-unquote dream life. Welcome my guest today, Maria DeJosia. Thanks for coming once again.
Thank you.
For those who did not watch the first show, tell us a little bit about your story.
Ooh, well, where do I start? Let's see. I had my son when I was 17, and there's lots of story in between there and here regarding what came along the way.
Right.
But what it eventually resulted in was that I am raising him myself without the help of his father, and I, at the same time, have been unwilling to give up on what I may have wanted for myself in a bigger way and just run out there and get, you know, a very, what someone would say, safe, stable job.
Right.
And that's what I want to do, and just, you know, go do that and that be the primary focus. But at the same time, I don't want to neglect my child either. So
right.
What the big balance and juggle is finding a way to balance my needs with his needs and trying not, there's always going to be a trade-off. Like, I'm always going to have to pull a little away from myself or maybe a little away from him.
Right.
But trying to make sure that it's as balanced as I can make it, so I'm not giving up on myself or giving up on him.
Right.
So it's, you know.
So we're going to start off by answering or asking some of those questions that people asked about the previous show.
Okay.
And then we're going to delve into the whole, you know, balance your life kind of thing. Where is the father of the son? And what kind of role has he played from when your son was born to present?
Well, he was in his life at first, and we actually were together, I'd say, up until the time he was 5 years old. And, you know, he was a high school boyfriend, so
right.
He wasn't exactly, you know, I wasn't thinking, oh, this is going to be a mate for life,
yeah.
And, you know, evaluating all those qualities and whether it would work. And so at a point we realized it just didn't work between us because we had grown so much from the ages of 16 to 21.
Right.
I mean, so much changes. So
especially people change a lot as it is through that point, and then throw a child into that mix and you're going to change even more.
Definitely. So at that point we decided that we couldn't be together.
Right.
And he started getting more and more inconsistent about being in his life. It was almost as if it was easier for him to be in the life when it was part of, he's there because he's, you know, he wanted to be the husband and the father,
right.
And to be part of the family life, but not so much to have the responsibility if he has a separate life from us now, but then he has to incorporate a son into that life and be responsible. So we started getting more and more inconsistent with how much he was around.
Right.
And over time, he eventually ended up calling to say he was moving. At the time I lived in San Diego, and that he was moving up, I want to say close to Riverside, that area, with his girlfriend at the time, and wanted to see his son before he went.
Right.
And at that point he'd been so inconsistent. I said, why don't you go ahead and move and really think about what it is you're doing here, whether you really want to be his father or whether you really want to be out of this, because every time you come around and then leave for an extended period, my son's left picking up those
right.
pieces over and over and over, so just to make a decision. And somehow what that translated into was, you know, he popped up one more time a year later and was not being very responsible in the manner in which
right.
he was trying to be part of his life, and then disappeared for a couple years. And I lived in the same house, the same phone number
right.
during that 3-year stretch after that. So, and I didn't have his contact information, so it was up to him. And anytime he did make a contact attempt, he didn't give me his real contact information. It was more, here's my brother's phone number while I'm in town, you know, family
right.
members who live locally, instead of me knowing how to get a hold of him.
So how does what do you tell your son in the process? Does he ask, I mean?
He used to ask a lot more. I mean, he obviously knows now that his
right.
father is not around,
right.
and he, I'm sure, still struggles with it emotionally, but doesn't think he's going to show up.
Well, because I just think that puts you kind of in the middle of it too, because
oh yeah, definitely.
I mean, you're kind of, you don't really necessarily want to badmouth the father, but yet you want, you don't want to get like some kind of blame or something.
Right,
so it's
of
kind of
course.
like,
It is a hard
What do
thing
you
to
do?
explain to, and it is hard not to badmouth. You know, it is
Yeah.
something you have to be very conscious of and really pay attention to. And it was definitely something where I had to, in the most tactful way, explain
Right.
to him. The way I put it to my son was, you know, we had you when we were both very young, and I grew up quicker than your father. And your father has yet to grow up that way.
a nice way.
And that
It
right. and just, you know, that he's not responsible enough at this
Right.
point to maybe understand how to do it. And it's not that he doesn't, it's probably not that he doesn't think about him or
Right.
wonder about him or want to see him or care about him from afar, but it's that, you know, he's not ready to take that responsibility. He's still working out things about himself.
Right.
And so
That's a good approach. That's a good approach, though.
I try.
That sounds good. It sounds good to me. Well, so you say you were 17 when you got when you had the baby?
17 when he was born.
Okay.
Yes.
So when you got pregnant, you were 16, depending upon when the birthday falls, which we talked about last time.
Yes, I was
Okay,
16.
so when you have to tell your parents, I assume you're still living at home.
At that point, yes.
How do you tell your parents, and how did they react?
Well, I lived with my mother, not my
Okay.
father. My father lived with my stepmom.
Okay.
And so I had to tell my mother first, and I didn't really plan it out. It was that I had gone and I ditched school to go take a pregnancy test at Planned
Right.
Parenthood, and had come home and at this point and just found out I was pregnant. And she called, and it was probably 1 o'clock in the afternoon, a time when I shouldn't have been home.
Right.
And without thinking, I pick up the phone, even though it's clearly saying, here I am, I'm ditching. But she's on the other end, and she asks me, you know, she's pretty irate. And she says, what are you doing home? And I said, well, I had a good reason. And she, you know, she kind of kept at me, and I just kept saying, it's a good reason, I can't tell you, I can't tell you. And then there was this long pause, and she said, oh my God, don't tell me you're pregnant. And I just went, I gotta go. And just like hung up the phone, really freaked out. I went upstairs and panicked and was packing my bags, and I don't think I knew where I thought I was gonna live. I just thought my friends would take me in or something. I just was really couldn't deal with it. And
I'm laughing, and it's not
big-
funny, but you're making me laugh.
Well, it was
'Cause
funny.
you're like-
I mean, it's funny looking back. At the time, it was like, you know, life or death situation in my head, and probably, you know, being a little dramatic, you know, packing my bags, and I'm gonna be ready to go out the door when she comes home. And when she came home, though, you know, I mean, obviously she was upset and surprised and wanted
Right.
to know what my plans were with the situation, but she did at that point say, well, you don't have to leave, you can stay here and we'll figure it out. And then with my father, who is Italian Catholic and just very traditional values, I wrote him
Right.
a letter because I was too scared to tell him. And I don't remember like what came about after that. I do believe that I talked to my stepmother first because it was hard for my father to deal with initially, I'm sure.
Right.
And I do remember my stepmother at that time, because I was 17, so I was still a minor, and her actually just being more concerned about the logistics of, I don't believe that my father and her they weren't married yet. Like they'd been together for a long time, but they hadn't yet legally married.
Right.
And so she was just trying to figure out how could I get on her insurance plan, things like that. Like hers was like, okay, let's take care of business and figure out
business
how
aspects.
to, you know, how to take care of this and at
Right.
least make it somewhat less hard. And so I honestly don't remember how I ended up talking to my father, whether I just came over for dinner and we didn't mention it, or I just know it was
like
something.
it didn't exist. He's right there. He's 2 now, but he didn't exist.
I know in the beginning it was very much like that. Like I don't believe that we didn't have a huge discussion about it. You know, like it would be mentioned in conversation, but not like with my mother, where it was sit down and talk about it, or my stepmother. Just, you know, it was my father being
A guy.
A guy.
I was like,
Not-
a guy.
Exactly, and not.
So
wanting
was
to
there
do that.
ever a point when you thought that you would take another option besides like having the baby and keeping the baby?
No.
So
No,
that
it just
wasn't
a
that
question.
wasn't even a question to you.